Welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now, the podcast where we dive deep into the moments of transformation, the times when not yet shifts into right now and everything changes. I'm your host, Jen Ginty, and this podcast is all about those pivotal moments in our life journeys. You know the ones, when the hesitation fades, when we take that first step, even if it feels like a leap. It's in these moments that growth and healing begins. Each episode will explore stories of resilience, moments of clarity, and the sparks that ignite real change. From personal experiences to expert insights, we'll uncover how people navigate the complex journey we call life and come out stronger on the other side. Whether you're searching for that spark in your own life or just curious about how change unfolds for others, you're in the right place. We'll discuss the ups and downs, the breakthroughs and setbacks, and how to embrace the right now, even when it feels out of reach. Because sometimes the hardest part of the journey is realizing that the moment you've been waiting for has already arrived. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get started. Welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now. Today I have a special guest, Sascha, and I'm going to introduce her. Sascha Stucky Schlossberg never knew sobriety was an option. She met her husband, thought he was intriguing, and invited him out for drinks after work. He said he was sober, and she had no idea what that meant. She knew alcohol didn't work well for her, but she didn't know there was a community of people for whom it also didn't work. Once she'd exhausted all of the things that she thought would make her okay, moving by herself, getting a psychiatrist and a therapist, going dry, and it still wasn't enough, she decided that she was okay or willing to accept, quote, something might be wrong with me, and went to her first AA meeting. Sascha is a TV and film actor, 2-Comma Club award-winning marketer, homeschool mom of 4, and is perpetually fixated on making impossibly impractical feats real. Hang around her long enough, and you'll find yourself feeling insanely grounded and infinitely more powerful in accomplishing your unlikely goals real too. Welcome, Sascha.
Thank you. I was like, that was the entire story in a nutshell. That concludes this episode.
Well, I mean, there's so much stuff in between I know we can talk about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Sometimes I tell people, like, what's your origin story?
My goodness. I mean, really, it was. Well, you know what? Let's talk about my origin with alcohol. That was actually my first encounters with it were parties. I remember like senior year of high school, there was a graduation party. I had parents who kept their eye on me. So I wasn't out there like some kids started very young. It was like, senior year in high school, college, that sort of thing. But it was like, oh, this makes me feel comfortable. Okay, I'm friendly. I'm suddenly all. And now I know it's like I didn't understand that I was an introvert. I didn't understand that I had social anxiety. All I knew was that alcohol felt so freeing for me. And it was a while after that when it was like, it became such a tool for me. Like when I was stressed, I remember in college, because it's funny because you mentioned my bio, all the things I do. I've always been like that, but I didn't have any tools. So it was like my senior year in college, I had 19 units. I was a resident advisor. I was in a sorority and I had an internship. And I remember after a Thursday class, it was like alcohol was my tool. I was like, okay, can't wait to go and black out because that was going to be my reset. And so it was literally such a tool for me. I did see things like I wondered why other people could go to parties and kind of make friends that would carry into sober time. And that wasn't the case for me. So I thought that was curious. Like I felt like a bit of an oddball, but I think I've always felt like a bit of an oddball. So it was like, well, that's interesting for them. But it never occurred to me that it might be a problem. It was like one of those things where I'm an experimental person. So when things were not going well, then I'd be like, fine, I'm just going to stop everything. Because in my 20s, medical marijuana cards became a thing. And it's not like now where you could go in and know what you're getting. You would go in and it was like, who knows? They'd be like, just eat half of this thing. And I'm like, I'm going to try the whole one. And then I'm literally, I will never forget. It was, I mean, it's funny, but it's not. It's like, I gave one to a coworker when we were waiting tables. And it was a small place. And then never in my life I felt like I was trying to grab onto the air. I needed something to help me. And I
Mhm.
ended up in my car. Like I had to leave and I just fell asleep or passed out in my car. And then my car battery died. So I had to call my mom to come and jump my car for me. It was like, it was medical marijuana being a tool.
Mhm.
I never quite saw it work quite as a tool for me, the way that I saw it work for others as a tool.
Mm.
So it was like these things that felt like they were maybe tools for others. I can't, it's like if you tell somebody that they have, take some ibuprofen, but you give them a bottle of it with no label, and they're like, oh, take half of a pill. And they're like, but my pain is bad. So maybe I'll take more. And like, there's just no, it was just this huge wasteland of experimentation, really. And like, okay, well, this doesn't work. So when things got really bad, I'd be like, okay, I'm just not going to do anything then. So little did I know that that's dry. I was white knuckling, but that would go, because if I have a hangover that's so bad that I'm in like paranoia, I'm like, okay, well, then drinking isn't the answer. And so then it was like, well, I did everything. Like I lived by myself. I got a therapist, I got a psychiatrist. And I was like, I am doing all of these things and I am still not okay. Like something is wrong. I'd met my husband, now husband. We were not husband and wife then. And he was the first person I ever met that was sober. But I'll never forget when he said I'm sober. I literally, or I don't know if he said he was sober or if he said he was an alcoholic. But I'll never forget the picture that I had was like, aren't people that are sober because they're alcoholics, aren't those the people that are like on Hollywood Boulevard laying in the
Mm.
gutter with a bottle and a bag of paper bag? Like that's my entire concept of what alcoholism was.
So you didn't have experience at all. Like there was nobody in your family, nobody around you that you knew was either an alcoholic or an addict in some way.
What's very funny is, yes, my grandmother, after my grandfather died, which was when I was 6, so as long as I've known her, she has been a very big drinker of vodka,
Hmm.
but it's literally positioned as her brand. Grandma's just sad. She would travel with her bottle of vodka. She would have carry spearmint breath mints, and so she would eat her mints. But that was her thing. Is she didn't drink water. She's still alive. We think the vodka's preserved her. She didn't
Could
drink,
be.
right? She doesn't drink vodka. She barely ate food. She would or didn't drink water. Barely ate food. She would just drink vodka. And when we were little, she would mix it with orange juice. So yes, I mean, I grew up with a grandma who that that was, but it's wild to explain like that was completely her brand, so much so that it was never even mentioned as potentially alcoholism. It was just like, oh, grandma's just sad. Grandma just drinks her alcohol. Like that was her vodka. It wasn't even called alcohol. It was literally vodka. It was such a specific thing that yes, but even it wasn't a I had no awareness. Isn't that a wild thing? It was like if you had a relative that their hobby is watching trains, like that's how it was positioned and addressed.
I think that's common though in generational and also cultural ways that, that's just the person that is there. We're not talking about the actions they take. We're not talking about, what they do. It's just that's the person overall. And I think that's where a lot of people do get stuck, not realizing that they have addictive personalities in their backgrounds, which I have a lot. And I talk to my children all the time about it as like, we have addictive personalities. We need to be very careful. But it's so easy to just notice this person in my life is this is just what she does. This is normal,
Yes.
right? Normalizing something that can be harmful, but you don't want your children to think of grandma as an alcoholic, right? You
Yeah.
want to preserve a certain idea of that person. And so it's not discussed when it actually should be discussed.
I love how you said the idea of explaining addictive personalities because I haven't figured out yet how to discuss that with our kids, for example. And we have Halloween it's tomorrow for us. And we have the switch come. So the kids are on board, but the switch comes, they leave a note that's their own personal touch. They leave their candy, the switch brings toys, then the candy's out of the house.
Yeah.
Because the kids are not the kids that will self-moderate with candy at all, which comes as no surprise. They have two parents that wouldn't self-moderate unless we're white knuckling or extremely structured. So the idea of how to bring those things up for the kids. And also though, there's, I say like the grandmother's maternal side, my dad, his entire life is his work, but it's fantastic. He's literally an astronaut. So I grew up with that sort of personality modeled. Like he's always learning. He's a fighter pilot while I was growing up, a test pilot. So I grew up seeing that sort of obsessive fixation on, but it was a professional, it's like professionally driven, right? Like we can position it however we like, but it's somebody who their entire life is focused around one subject matter and a constant improvement and all of that. So I've seen it in hindsight. I see how this sort of personality type has come from both sides of my family and shows up, and there's healthy ways we can channel it and unhealthy ways we can channel it. But where I was in my 20s is that I also, for me, the alcohol is like this allowed a part of me through where ultimately it was like I was living in two different personalities. It was like me who would drink was really fun and outgoing, but that wasn't carrying over into real life necessarily. So for me, though, it was this terrifying, not just deciding that I was willing to go to meetings, but I remember the next terrifying moment, like, because first it's, okay, I don't want to feel like I'm broken. That was really, I sat there with my husband back when we were just friends. We sat there outside of a museum and I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm broken. And he's like, everybody's broken. I was like, huh. I mean, I was like heart thumping, terrified in my first meeting. And then fast forward a bit later, I was terrified once I realized that sobriety meant the idea of giving up my identity as a party girl. Because you don't get to have the next thing until you give up what you know. And that is a terrifying thing, to give up the identity that you know and to create a vacuum. At the same time, you're giving up your major tool? Like, how brave is that? How daring?
I talk a lot about that when it comes to my trauma. And sometimes there is this fear in the back of my head. If I heal this trauma, will I be the same person? Right? So I think that's what was really hard for me was it still is sometimes I'm like, wow, I'm on this journey of healing, but I'm afraid that I'm not going to be that same person. Little one learning to navigate their big emotions? Meet My Moody Monster, the pull-apart buddy to help kids understand and manage their feelings. With its fun, interactive design, Moody turns tough feelings into teachable moments, giving your child a playful way to express themselves. Whether it's after a rough day or when those big frustrations hit, Moody is there to lend a hand. Perfect for calming down or even just a cuddle. My Moody Monster helps your child communicate their emotions while learning healthy coping skills. Go to mymoodymonster.com to learn about Moody today.
I felt that the same way. I felt actors and artists feel that way a lot too, as you think like, well, if I'm this creative and there's this myth of being like this struggling, but struggling not just in monetarily, struggling emotionally. And the idea that if you give that up, that you're going to sacrifice your creativity, your art, your potential.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can completely understand that feeling of, well, I'm not going to be that person if I give up this major part of my life. So having this feeling of being broken, did you feel like you grew up in kind of a perfectionist kind of lifestyle that you
Yes.
weren't allowed? Right. You weren't allowed to be, quote, broken.
Yes. Oh my gosh, such perfectionism. And I see it now how it I've been getting more in tune with my intuition, and I had a dream 3 nights ago that I was like asking for an answer And I heard myself defending myself. Well, but it's not, I know that the issue isn't perfectionism. And it was like, oh, I woke up,
But
I was like,
really,
and I woke up and I'm like, still? I'm still? Because for me, it was like perfectionism and judgment. But I know that judgment is also self judgment, because if you're perfectionist, you're judging yourself as harshly as you're judging everyone else.
mhm,
And so it was like, the things that were so, who thinks of those? It was like toenails. If our toenails, like our pedicure wasn't perfect, you did not show your toes. And these things that truly don't matter. But it was when we had hard times or anything, it was just, I had such a feeling of isolation because everything had to look good. Like when we
mhm.
had a hard financial times, it was still, the priorities were interesting. And I know that my parents were obviously doing the best that they could, and etc. But it was like, it was a funny, it felt like funny dichotomies. Like I had an uncle who worked at Nordstrom, and so we could go and get all the clothing there with his fabulous discount.
Ooh,
So we had clothing from Nordstrom, but our finances weren't necessarily reflecting that. It was just this very weird, but it's perfectionism, but not perfect at all, but not being able to show it. And it's wild as an adult, because you go, oh, like we couldn't have anybody in the house if the house wasn't spotless.
mhm.
But we didn't live in a spotless house. So then that just
Mhm.
meant people couldn't come in.
Yeah.
And so it's wild to think about that now, especially because the life that I've created, we're just so, I've created a life of like, the more the merrier, come on in, everyone's welcome. Like my kids would never, their experience is so wildly different. Even how my kids behave in public versus how we did. We were always complimented for being so well behaved.
Yep.
I think my kids have gotten that compliment once.
But you know what? When you grow up in a family where it's better to look good than to feel good, it's
Yeah.
really hard to separate yourself from that later on, even knowing in your head that, it's okay. I don't have to be perfect every minute of every day. I don't have to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect employee, whatever it may be. It's really hard to tear yourself away from that. And then it's easy also then to get into something that kind of makes you pull away from that, which could be the drinking, the alcohol, creating an environment where you don't have to feel perfect.
And when you didn't raise that way, how you said it was more important to look good than to feel good, feelings weren't a thing at all.
Hmm.
It's just that I had no capacity for having feelings, which was a fascinating thing, because that showed up early sobriety. I was in an acting class and we did this emotional recall thing, and everybody cried except for like two of us. I couldn't cry. And the teacher back then, he was like, if you struggled with this exercise, then you may want to look into like trauma work or something. At the time, I was like, yeah, I don't have any trauma. All right, well, I
Right.
don't know. I don't, because I didn't know that there's also trauma can be just a combination of little t traumas, that it
Yes.
doesn't have to be some, because I sat in AA and I could hear there are oftentimes big T traumas that color people's lives.
Yes.
And that can be maybe more clear for them that there is a problem, or they grew up in a household with big T trauma and alcoholism or other addictions. But I didn't, so that made it even harder to identify anything. I literally was like, no, that's not it. I don't know what that is. So I had no emotional availability or accessibility at all. And so then alcohol made it like not easier to feel. It just somehow reset everything, because even if you're not feeling, your bodies are feeling. You're
Yeah.
emotionally, the things are stuck and trapped. And so it was a tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a tool to, if not to feel, but to feel different,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and
To
and
relax.
yes, yes, that you rely on it for your relaxation. You rely on it to, you know, think that you're a better friend, a better wife, a better girlfriend, whatever it is. It's this like somewhat, I don't know, veil
And it
that
would,
comes
for
over.
me, it would slow down or even stop my thoughts, my brain, just in general. Because I could work out, I could do all the healthy things, but that's, if you have a very busy brain, it's not
Hmm.
going to, and no other tools, the sedative and depressive effects of alcohol, and in my case, marijuana, those things would, those would do the trick.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just that the side effects and everything else weren't useful for me once I
Yeah.
figured that, you know?
So you met your now husband and he introduced you to sober.
Mm-hmm.
And how long did it take after that for you to be like, yeah, I think this is the way to go?
You know, so I met him in October of 2011, and my sobriety date is April 9th of 2012. And I believe, I guess, I know I must have attended a meeting or two in March, but I was like, well, I'm just going to try it on my own. And I got 9 days, and then I went out, and then I got a sponsor on the 9th, and then have stayed in ever since. So it was, I guess, all things considered, relatively fast. And I was in my 20s. So relatively fast and not that terribly late compared to plenty of other stories. And now I'm one of the people, I had 12 years. Like, what is that? How's that even?
Wow.
That's wild.
It's amazing. Congratulations on that.
Thank
It's
you.
a lot. It's a lot of work. So what helped you through the first few months or even years of staying sober?
Gosh, honestly, the community of AA, because I went to meetings, the community was the biggest thing. Because for me also, it's like I went to meetings in Hollywood. It was the coolest, smartest people in there. So you get to see people that have these amazing lives and wins, or celebrities in there, and just everybody with the rigorous honesty and all of that. And so, and it was just a great community. So the fellowship of going, having the women that would, when I'm having a meltdown, because it's a day where the emotions are all going to fall out because
Mhm.
I have no sense of regulating them. They put me in the car and they're like, you're just going to go run errands with us. Like having those supports, because I lived by myself. Having those supports made the biggest difference in the world, and seeing people walking the walk and setting the example, because I wasn't the example. You would hear people and you go in the rooms and they're like, I got clean and my life changed and now I have money and this and that. And I was like, where is mine? Like,
Work for me.
yeah, I did not feel like that. Uh, and so I certainly wasn't there due to quick wins. I was there because I was willing, and the community of people were so great. Because I remember things like I went out with a guy that I'd been seeing, and like reflexively, I grabbed his drink and I was like, oh, I can't drink this. I put it down and I was like, okay, so maybe I'm not going to go into bars for a while. Like, there was definitely some rewiring of habits, giving myself space. And I started doing the step work from the beginning. And so being willing, I'd had so much discomfort and challenging times and so many little T traumas in my 20s that I was willing to do the step work. And so willing to sit with like the ugliness of the fourth step. And so when I was doing that sort of thing and seeing like, oh, okay, I have some really unhealthy patterns. And here's what this means. And here's how these patterns are actually stopping me from what I want. Like I'm literally,
Mm.
I could see my self-destruction on paper. So that sort of thing helped me go, okay, because I am goal driven. So there was also that piece, is that I have big goals and visions, and I know that I definitely had resentment in the beginning because I was like, why do I have to do so many things? I was like doing sleep meditations as I fell asleep and journaling, and I had a therapist and psychiatrist, and I was going to AA meetings, and I was like, why do I have to do all this stuff to just function like a quote normal human? But I still was willing to do it because I had big goals. So I don't know if I didn't have big goals, like would I have, and I didn't have community, would it have stuck? Would I have been willing to do it? Because you have to have a reason
Yes.
in order to be willing to do it.
Right, right. And there's a common theme that I'm coming across with people that are sharing their stories with me is community. You know, one person we were talking about weight loss community. I have a lot of experience now with trauma community, with group therapies. And when I was young and forced to be in group therapy, I hated it. Why do I need to be here? Nobody really wanted to be there. But as an adult, with the goal of getting healthy and healing, being amongst peers who understand and want to also do the things that you're doing, it's so important to have them around you. And so I'm finding that's a really, really deep part of a lot of people's life journeys is finding that community.
Yeah, that was, I felt extremely, extremely lucky for that.
So, for people who don't have experience with AA, you spoke of step 4 and how difficult it was. What is step 4?
That was the inventory. And I think my sponsor had customized mine for me because I was speaking to somebody else about it and they're like, that's not what I did for mine. And I was like, oh, so without it was a personal inventory. And I'm very unsure now how custom mine was, if this was just mine or everybody's experience. What do you want to tell me? What do people normally inventory?
I don't know.
Okay. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I don't have experience with AA, so I'm not sure.
It's a personal inventory. And so I think people do different things, but mine was like every guy that I'd had any form of relationship with.
Okay.
And so what the pattern that I spotted for myself was that I was in a pattern of settling for people that were actually unavailable in any number of ways. But I never would have caught that without looking at it on paper.
That makes
And
sense.
so and so when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is alarming. Like, this is alarming because when you look at things on paper, it's very different than maybe what you're thinking in your head or what you're it's just like tracking anything, right? It's like when they say if we're going to be healthy, then track everything you eat. And then you go, oh, okay. All those packs of ketchup really add up, for example.
Yeah.
So it's very much that same sort of thing. When you see something on paper, and again, I don't know what other people inventory, uh, because now I'm like, I've been married for 12 years. So if I were sober now, I don't know what my inventory would be. So when you look at that on paper, it can be very confronting. And then how can you not spiral a bit and be like, oh no, I'm terrible, I'm self-destructive, and not spiral? So that, and then 5, which is I could be totally misremembering it, but to me, it was my first experience with like forgiveness, like this concept of dropping the rock. Like, okay, because beating yourself up is just another thing that's going to make you go use whatever your coping tool is. So being able to be super uncomfortable, be confronted with your own weaknesses, shortcomings, choices, and then be like, okay, and I can release this
Hmm.
because that isn't easy. It sounds, I don't know if it sounds easier than it is or it is easier than it sounds, one of the two, but it really can be that simple to go, okay, I can forgive myself and I can choose something new. I can choose because sometimes just that awareness allows us to break patterns.
That's so true.
Other thing that was hugely fascinating for me is sitting there in a meeting, and I remember the first meetings always hearing people talk about gratitude, and I wasn't raised with any form of gratitude
Hmm.
at all. I'd practically never heard of the word. And so the idea of it was just more entitlement, like what we don't have. So the idea of gratitude and humility were so foreign to me. And it wasn't that I was arrogant, it's just that I had no concept of humility, which is a very important personal value structure to have. It's more grounding than not having it. So the idea of humility and gratitude was so foreign for me. So much of what I heard in there was so foreign that it took a while for some of these things to land for me.
And sometimes that's age, right? You were in
Yeah,
you were in
was
your
my 20s.
20s. Yeah. And maybe now later on you may have been able to catch on to it more, but we're also different in our maturities.
Yeah. And I think about, my kids have heard of gratitude and that sort of thing. But some of these things are also, I think, generational. I don't think most of us necessarily grew up with hearing of gratitude or gratitude practices. It's like, be grateful for what you have, the roof over your head.
Right.
But that's not. So I don't mean these things either as judgment of my parents, because thanks to my own, I don't know, years of working, continuing to work things out, is going, no, my parents were also just people who were doing the best or not the best, whichever, that they could do. And they were just humans too. So I don't say any of these things with like shame or judgment for them. It's just more, oh, these are things that maybe I somehow missed, and these are useful things to help me and be the fullest version of myself, the fullest, healthiest version of myself. And gratitude, humility, and personal accountability, rigorous honesty, those were all hugely, hugely important to be in a space where you could just not be okay.
Yeah.
I'd never seen that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't see that. So it's new and kind of alien.
Yeah.
So you've been 12 years. That's amazing. And I congratulate you on that. Did you have times in those years that you had, you wanted more often than other times? You're like, oh, I wish I had a drink or I wish I could smoke.
I would say, well, it's funny because I did in the beginning of sobriety. I insisted my husband teach me how to smoke cigarettes because
Yep.
I was having a hugely stressful time. Somebody had hit my car, and nearly totaled it. It was ridiculous that it wasn't a total, but for whatever reason, it wasn't. But I didn't have my car for like 3 months. And then the person also sued me, and it all came out in the wash. It was completely insane. It's I when I first moved to LA, my driver's license, I had a Beverly Hills address. I did not live in Beverly Hills, but the person that hit my car saw it, and they're like, "Oh, money." So they took me to small claims court. As in, like, fully established adults, I could be like, okay, this is annoying, but I was in a huge panic because I just had no idea, and no coping skills and no frame of reference. So I was like, please teach me to smoke cigarettes. So it wasn't like I didn't create, and there was another point where I went to like compulsive unhealthy calorie counting. So it wasn't like I didn't maybe go out in other ways. It was just I managed to stay clean. But yeah, in the beginning, it did feel a bit like whack-a-mole with like trying to find new tools, trying to find until you get to your. I think we should, if somebody's listening and they're newer in sobriety or considering it, give yourself grace because the beginning is going to be messy. It's
Mhm.
not just like, oh, great, okay, you've given away, you've gotten rid of your biggest tool, and now you're automatically going to have healthy coping tools. Like, no,
No.
it's whack-a-mole. It's gonna squeeze out the edges like slime and be ugly for a little
Well,
bit.
it's like trauma. You have to build a toolbox of coping skills, and it takes a while to build that toolbox. You have to be constantly working on it, and you have to try skills that may not work for you, and then you try other ones. So it's a long process. It's not, oh, suddenly I have all these coping skills that's going to help me stay sober.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, no, I mean, there were times when it was harder socially. It's like as a mom, I moved cities. And so much of mom culture was like, oh, hey, we're going to do mom's wine night.
Mm.
And I'm like, crap. Because not only do I not drink, when you go to a mom's wine night, it's not like a regular party where you can just not drink. Like all the moms are going to get tipsy and sloshed and be silly, and I'm not even naturally silly. And I'm going to be, and people, especially when it's something like that where it's mom's wine night, they're going to feel judged if you're not drinking. So then you can't even go. So I was encountering that kind of thing. Like, okay, well, how do I and now I feel like now there is so much more culture around sobriety and dry January and all of these things where it's not so offensive to people. But I found that my own sobriety could be offensive to people at times.
That's
So,
interesting.
so that part was hard. And then with enough time, and I try to make sure to mention it on social and that kind of thing, so that people aren't surprised because I will attend things. And I think that the more that I also make kind of sobriety, it sounds so silly to be like, well, we kind of have to make sobriety a bit of our identity for it to stick in to work, but we kind of do because just the same as I was great at being a party girl, like I was the one who was going to suggest we do shots, then now I'm just an example in different forms of alternative living. So sobriety, you know,
Yeah.
like and so I'm the person that will give people resources. People will reach out to me. And I have like a list of different alternative, non-alcoholic drink companies and options and things. And I do get reached out to from people that'll be curious. That doesn't mean it sticks, and that doesn't mean it everybody's going to try it. But by being a resource, I can provide that level of hope, but I can also let people know in advance so that I don't have to be like, oh, I I don't drink because I don't enjoy that awkward feeling when it's like an invitation to a mom's wine night, for example.
It's interesting that you say that it offends some people, your sobriety. And that I think is a real social, society has really let us down in that sense because it's different. Yet again, your uniqueness is offensive. And that's just where we're at in our culture. So I feel really sad hearing that, people are offended by something that is so important to you and that helps you through your daily life and life overall.
The one that I find very interesting, and I had people say to me, well, you're not an alcoholic. So I did have people say that to me, like, you don't need to go to meetings. And I had somebody message me and she's like, did people ever say to you, you don't need meetings? I was like, yes, which is a very common thing if you are not the person living in a gutter who has a DUI, who is been through all the worst case, obvious things where everybody feels the need to stage an intervention. Anything short of that, people around you are generally going to say you don't need meetings, you're not an alcoholic. Because just like any level of change or growth, it can inadvertently put up a mirror for other people. And they don't want to look in the mirror. They don't want to consider, would my life be better without this? Well, if this person made this change and I'm not, it causes all sorts of self-reflection that people did not sign up for and don't want. And so it's so much easier for them to say, well, you don't need this.
Yeah, it makes sense because there are people who, if you're doing the same thing that I'm doing and you suddenly need to be sober, then I'm someone who needs to be sober as well. And everybody has different experiences and different things that happen in their lives. Doesn't have to be everybody looks the same, so they have to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I wish I had some lovely pat answer for what you would say to people when they say you don't need meetings. But I don't have that answer. I would just say be comfortable and know that you don't have to defend yourself because you're making a decision, an experimentation that works for you.
Hmm. Wow. So thank you so much for being a resource that you're allowing others to come to you to ask your experience and what that you think they should do. What would you say to someone who is considering moving into a sober life?
I would actually, these days, there's like sober influencers, which is amazing. And I don't follow any, so I can't vouch for anyone's content or authenticity. But I would say to look up sobriety on social, because there are communities around it. There are people. I wouldn't be surprised if there were Facebook groups around it. There are people that are in community, and the community pieces are easier than ever to find. So even if you can't attend a meeting, now thanks to the pandemic, there's Zoom meetings, which is a very different thing than in person. But now meetings are more accessible than ever. You can go, alcoholism is a self-diagnosed thing. So you can go on the AA website and take the quiz and just see if it's something that is worth experimenting with. And if you do decide to do it, find a sponsor. Go to the meetings, find somebody who has something that you admire or would want for yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what that thing is. Don't judge it, follow your instinct. It can be self-centered or selfish, that it's fine. Pick someone with something that you want, ask them to sponsor you if they're accepting sponsees, and do the work.
Yeah.
Because some people will get good results from just going dry. If you stop drinking, you might just lose some weight and you might feel less tired. That's great, but you're not going to feel less irritable. And you've taken away your biggest tool. So without supports there, it's not for a lack of weakness or willpower. It's just that you really need new tools. And so you need the support to do that. And so it isn't something that I would recommend going dry or doing it yourself for some long period, because it's one of the most major changes you can make that no one ever talks about.
Well, you've given so much great understanding and knowledge of, it's complicated. It's extremely complicated. Like we talked about before, everybody's experiences are different, and how they handle alcohol, how they handle substances is different. But, at some point, if you are considering this, then it's a viable option that you should really look into. Because if you're thinking it, most likely you've been thinking it for a while.
Oh gosh, yes. Don't let that thought continue to loop. If you're here and you're listening to this, just take the action. Take the action that will make your future self proud. And when it gets hard, remember that you're creating a new identity and you're building the future you. And that you don't get there through things being easy. You don't get there through doing the same things. So do the daring, terrifying, uncomfortable thing, because your future self will be like, oh my gosh, I'm a whole new person. And it will be so worth it. Your community, everything does change for the better.
It's great advice. So where can we find you, Sascha?
My main website for all things work and me is what's good, GUUD.co. That links to my social. That has everything there.
I love that. It's a
Yes,
great website.
what's good.
That's good.
It's only because the original version of our company name, which was Good Marketing, which is Good Marketing, was taken. So it's like, what's good? That came to me, and that's so much more fun to say. So
It is.
.co, yeah.
And it's memorable.
Yes, yeah.
Well, thank you again for this conversation. It was excellent. So much great advice and information.
Thank you. I feel a little naked after it, so I hope it I hope it helps people. It feels daring for me to, even talk about my personal inventory. These are scary things. These are not, but I've learned being scared is, the more we talk about things and the more that we shine light on things, it alleviates shame. That doesn't mean it's comfortable as we do it, but we can free ourselves and free others when we're willing to. So I feel a little naked, but I'm glad and trusting that it's for the greater good.
Well, thank you for being, open and sharing your experiences. It is tough. It's tough to talk about things that, do, like you said, that can bring shame at times. But I do this because I want others to not feel alone. And I think that when I have my guests come on, I think they share a similar feeling of
Hmm.
that. So I thank you very much for being open.
You're welcome. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Sascha for sharing her experience with living a sober life. The vulnerability is truly appreciated because when we share our stories, we're allowing others to see themselves in us and feel empowered to start their own healing and life journeys. And that community was such a powerful tool for her journey to sobriety. It's a common theme in the show. There is power in community, and it's okay to reach out for the life preserver they can throw you. Thank you again, Sascha. You are a beautiful light in this world.